Over my working career, I've been very fortunate in that I've attended all of the WCPT conferences since 1987. They're held every 4 years, and I'm looking forward to going to the Vancouver one in just a few weeks' time. 1987 was quite a memorable conference. It was held in Sydney, and Brian Davey, who was actually a classmate of mine in Dunedin, he had moved to Sydney, and he was actually was immediate past president of the Australian Physiotherapy Association and was conference chairman for this particular world conference. He then became the next world president and did his 4-year term, but back to the 1987 Congress. At this time, apartheid was a big thing, and the Scandinavian countries were very upset that South Africa was going to be coming, delegates were going to be coming to the conference in Sydney, and so they set up a boycott. And the Scandinavians didn't come, and it was very doubtful. There was a lot of uncertainty about they made it quite clear they were not coming. Brian Davey must have had many sleepless nights worrying about the economics of the conference, because he was committed to the hiring of several big hotels and conference venues. They were expecting 3,000 to 4,000 delegates. Then, of course, this boycott gathered momentum, and the Indian government, for example, joined the boycott and would not allow any of its people to go out of the country to any conference that South Africa was going to be. And it was that was a government thing from their part. It wasn't a voluntary thing from the professional body at all. So when it came to the general meeting which preceded the conference papers, we were actually without a quorum for the general meeting. And the lawyers in London had to a certain extent anticipated this, in that one of the lawyers had come to Sydney to deal with problems that could arise. I remember him very vividly. He was like a character that stepped out of a Dickens book, and you really wanted to wipe the cobwebs off him. And he spoke in a very slow, very British voice, and really didn't know what to do. The president at that time was a German lady, and she too was a little bit helpless and hopeless. And we had, I suppose you'd call it the Claytons meeting. We had an unofficial general meeting where we tried to untangle the problems that we were in. And if it hadn't been for people like Brenda Myers, who is now the current Secretary General, who at that meeting was the voting delegate for Canada, and Michael Lamont and Erwin Drock and myself, all from New Zealand, plus there was an American lady, whose name escapes me at the moment. Nobody else could see what to do or what their way around it was, and there were ridiculous suggestions being made. But the fact remained that no business could be ratified at that meeting, and it wasn't till some time later that a special general meeting was called, I think, and the business was ratified. However, much to Brian Davey's pleasure, the delegates still turned up in sufficient numbers for it to be financially viable. I mentioned that Brian Davey was the incoming president for the WCPT at that Sydney meeting. He went on and finished his time at 91 conference at the Barbican in London. He is our second New Zealander to be a world president. Glenn Park, who had been Inspector of Physiotherapy, Registrar General, or Registrar of the Board, She was one of the very early, in fact she was the first New Zealand delegate to the very first physiotherapy conference that was held. She, I think it was the Melbourne conference that she became world president at, but I don't remember the dates of it. There's always been a feeling that New Zealand could never afford to have people put forward to that high office. The society was never particularly financially buoyant and was very dependent on a grant from the Department of Health to fund a delegate to these conferences, and for that reason, for many years, the WCPT delegate was Leslie Askew when she was Registrar of the Board and Inspector of Physiotherapy. It didn't get out to the Joe Blogs in the street.